Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audio narrations of various stories across the internet. In this series, we'll be focusing on a web novel called There Is No Epic Lucha, Only Puns, from the website ReUpload, and in this video, I'll be doing chapters 19 to 21. I hope that you enjoy. There Is No Epic Lucha, Only Puns, chapter 19, Dio and Friends. Chris was just finishing his last patrol in the town of Durance. So far, he had argued with one night demon, sent a hag home, and made Mr. Coppergold pay a fine for illegal mining in another man's yard. Chris scowled as Von, the banker, stalked into the dark of night. It was his nature, so Chris let him off with a single glare, but Von wasn't affected. Being a 400-year-old vampire, the banker had more than enough trouble just keeping up with the new currency of copper and graves, copper pieces, and that had more value than gold due to the government mandate. That was cruel, but soon the economy would move on to pure mana-based currency, where people only had to handle paperwork to claim that they owned. One grumbled about it, but the man had a habit of accepting blood money to look the other way with small matters, or just blood really. Quis once bribed him to remove the weekly wicked warlocks from the public list of purchases. His enjoyment was his own. A peacekeeper had to be open and honest, which made them rather easy to remove from the community found them lacking. In this town, simply being dismissed was beyond a career crippling. One old bored woman could make a couple of elder mages dance to her song and crumpets, and it would make Quis's goal of burning the world tree harder than needed. If one asked, Quis did not intend for the tree to die, but only to remind it that it could be. And Quis definitely did not have a backstory that involved such a tree, nor did he invest anything and everything in such a goal. World trees made mana more abundant, which made burning one rather odd goal for a mage. Quis sniffed and shot a look at the barrel goblin that switched hiding places as people slept. Barrel goblins were protected under legal law that stopped more harmless pests from being slaughtered wholesale. These particular pests would hide in chests or barrels and scared those who opened them. They were usually more mischievous than harmful, though the occasional cold codger in the kingdom did die of a heart attack, but that was rare. Like a wall tree, Quis could burn them as he spotted them, but only the kind word of the law prevented him so. Rudy got a kick out of them as well, which didn't affect his actions one bit, but he did let them live for no other reason whatsoever. Quis turned on the spot as Fig walked out of his home. His true name was Racustemina Fig Mortis, but no one liked saying Rack or Mortis, and the man was only half something. It was a fancy way of saying no one had any clue what his human parent fell in love with an outside niche community. No one really wanted to know. Fig had 3 arms and 4 eyes, and his height towered at 8 foot, with a wicked energy leaking off of him. Fig was nice, and he ran the local Thabspade charity. Thabspade had been invented when Fig had insisted that no one argued when one of his 4 eyes turned black and people fell flat. It was some day between Tuesday and Thursday. Quis didn't want to meet him due to his need to have long lectures on Quis's alcoholism and his own piety. It was annoying, and Quis wasn't sure that a fireball would have any effect on the half-human, half-thing. He was a nag and rather unlikable one at that. There was a comic cruelty that ebbed with those facts. Quis turned down the street he'd rather avoid and ran into someone else entirely. The man held up tiny random chests that could hold anything between some copper or a lost Bible of Yagmishtkon. 5 copper for 1 chest, 3 gold, you get 10. The blind Edgar Adams offered, and Quis stormed past him before he got his remaining joy in life locked behind some paywall. He moved past the smoking woman. Quis, you have a she began, and Quis ignored her with a growl on his face. I know, tell me how to avoid people, and I'll pay you. He snapped, and the woman glowered. You may live in interesting times. She spat, and Quis turned to her with a full, dark, abysmal glare. The woman ran away into the darkness, and Quis looked around to the rest of the soothsayer alley. Anyone else have any illuminating commentary? He asked quietly, and one man held up a hand. My hamster's knee bones are telling me that you're about to become a very important character, the old man ranted, and Quis felt a fire rising up in his throat. He calmed it down and exhaled. The village burning days were behind him. His village burning days were behind him. I think that you and Rudy Drakensbane should have good chemistry. The love which proclaimed and Quist pulled out his book of finds and the street magically became very empty. I'm a peacekeeper, not the local cleric priest, who gains power listening to your cretins. I'm Quist Fire Smasher, and I will not be slandered by being shipped up with some vulgar woman. He called out to now silent row of buildings. No one answered, and Quist considered his job done for the night, lest no more children would be proclaimed as heroes on his watch. Then again, if he had some confused children with him, people would mostly leave him alone as they focused on the fresh meat. The girl with the wonky scar of a star in her chin, goldmine to these people. Quist moved past the street and was only thankful that the merchants that screamed all day slept, and he didn't need a +11 staff of draconic summoning. He'd had enough of dragons to last him for the next 10 years. The Gem Shadows? Sure, he'd love to be ignored by people. Shame most people that lived here couldn't be fooled by anything short of a heroic illusion, and then some. Quist walked to his hut, where someone had left a bunch of horseshoes on his doorstep. They looked to be fresh off a centaur's berserker, and Quist gathered them up. He had no idea who kept leaving him good luck charms, but he was hardly about to turn down free stuff. Ruli would sooner leave him a centaur manure than she certainly wasn't her. The gifts confused him, but he peered out of his window and saw no one. Maybe it was a joke? Quist didn't get jokes. He just often failed to get other people's sense of humours unless he was so drunk that rocks on the side of the road looked amusing. He turned off the glow lamp and went to bed, praying that some new fool would apply it to the peacekeepers tomorrow. If Delta and the dungeon had got anything right, it was that having minions to do your work for you was amazing. Outside of the peacekeeper's hut, a dark figure moved, away from the hiding spot that they had been sitting for the last 4 hours. The way Quist had picked up those gifts, it was scandalous, and a person felt too shy to even think about the event. Maybe tomorrow they would leave an alder tree and fruits. Yes, Quist would like them. I challenge you, Dio shouted at the spiders, and they simply moved around his feet. Dio jumped back and pointed his broken blade at the spiders. I challenge you, he repeated. And he had been going on for 10 minutes, and Delta was too shocked to do anything other than stand there in stunned disbelief. The 2 others had stayed in the tunnel discussing homework. I'm going to do my paper on the futility of life and why death always wins, the guy said, pushing up his glasses, so they shined off the torch perfectly, and he seemed aware of where all the light sources were at any given moment. The girl nodded. Mine is on darkness, she muttered, and Dio watched the spiders fled away from his voice into the walls. Ha ha! I won! He called, moving forward, tripping over a tripwire and rolling into the webs and wall. Why am I here? Amundsen asked himself, and the girl shrugged. He overpowered you, and your spells suck, she said bluntly. Amundsen glared, but he shivered as Dio walked back to them, his rusty armor and broken blade covered in a web. I not a rap, he shouted through the web, and Poppy clapped slowly. Yay! She cheered with an energy of the dead. Amundsen eyed the room with a sudden deep understanding. These spiders may be poisonous, and the webs may slow us down if we hit the tripwires. He pointed out that Delta was pretty sure her spiders weren't poisonous. They did have a white line around their butts. Awesome. Spiders drain fluids from their prey, and the life drains from me. Poppy said to Dio, gave her a thumbs up. Agus fuels, he complimented, and Poppy removed the web from his face. Nah. Now you need to stop talking and keep going, she ordered with a lack of emotion, and Dio turned on the spot. I will beat this dungeon, he yelled, and rushed out of the room. Amundsen sighed with relief and picked up the web with one hand. This stuff looks to be good stuff. Peacekeeper Quist did mention spiders, but this is beyond normal. He inspected, and Delta felt shy as he inspected her work. Poppy just shuffled after Dio's distant screams. One of courage, not fear. Come on, take some berries. They smell nice. Poppy sighed and shoved some into her mouth as she passed. Maybe we can use these for some durable armor, or perhaps they can form a unique potion to resist the sticky traps, or maybe we can turn into spiders and blend them into the local biosphere. I'd like to make a spider skeleton, but this will do. He shoved some of the web into his pocket, and Delta guessed that was nice. At least one of them liked a web. She shook off her shock and for now and moved on down the tunnel and saw that Dio was in the pond room. "Face me, demon of the water!" he called, and the Waddles eyed him his guests. Poppy walked in and then paused. "Yeah, maybe don't bother to duck it," she began, but Dio jumped into the water and then seemed to sink. "Can he swim?" Amista asked, and Poppy sighed. Delta hoped so, because she didn't think what to do if someone had tried to swim and couldn't swim. He said that the main characters can't swim and never learned. Hold on. She looked more annoyed than concerned about the screaming Dio. She held out one hand in an odd way and closed her eyes. "Water suction, octopod style," Poppy mumbled, and she inhaled, sucking in the pond water towards her mouth, where it turned into a whirlwind. The water was dragged onto the land and hauled into Dio with it. Delta blinked at the odd wording of that magic that had happened. Octopod style? That just screamed monster magic. "I challenge you to a water duel," the young man finished saying as he hacked up the water. Poppy sighed and lowered her hood in annoyance. Amster turned to the left. "Spiders, ducks. This dungeon is lame," he complained, and Delta froze. Lame. Her dungeon was lame. Delta felt the word clunk around in her head like a heavy lead ball. Lame. "A monster! Are you blind? This duck is truly rare, dark drake, a monster of myth. This dungeon is amazing!" Dio yelled at his friend. Delta watched him with wide eyes. He knew what Waddles was. Dio thought that she was amazing. Yeah, dungeon sounded like trouble, but this one is nice. Poppy yawned and moved out of the pond room as Dio turned and bowed to Waddles. "I respectfully bow out of this duel, fair duck." He laughed and ran after his companions. Delta felt touched by his words until she remembered what room was next. Oh no, that was exactly what she had planned for. Delta rushed out of the room as Waddles eyed Dio. It closed his eyes and nodded. Dio didn't see how it glowed with a soft light, and he saw that the coat of the rude one had narrowed his duck eyes. Amster never saw how he glowed with a dark light. Dio wasn't an adventurer. He hadn't completed any dungeons before, but with the dungeon just appearing outside of town, he knew that it was his chance to finally become one. Dio had always wanted to explore a dungeon, and exploring one that no one else had done would be the best thing ever. So far, there had been spiders and ducks. That was so cool. Not many dungeons had those combos. Dio felt lucky that his town had gotten a cool dungeon. "Allies, I see mud ahead," Dio spoke, and he turned to look at his friends with a big smile. Poppy's lips moved, but it was hard to see that they were a hood. "Bother, platforms, jump." He was sure she said. Dio looked at Amster. "Lish, jump, one from another, boring, duck." He might have said, and Dio shook his head. "The duck was powerful, and this will be fun," he said calmly. Being completely deaf didn't numb the excitement that Dio had towards exploring. His mother was a bard, and his father was a classic warrior who had used special battle shouts. He had no idea why Amster was dragging his feet. This was once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He leapt onto one of the wooden circles, and then he stumbled and fell onto the one to the left. It held as the one he aimed for had tripped slightly. He grinned and praised the quest gods for their gift of good luck. He also had a small prayer to the dark drake. One could never be too careful. He turned to see Amster scoff in his aim for the wooden platform furthest away from him, and he flipped completely and amazingly. Healer ended up in the mud with a rather impressive splash that hit the ceiling. The man looked to be yelling in excitement and waved his arms to invite Poppy. She looked about shy away, and Dio jumped down to yell. "I shall join you," he yelled, and Amster's face didn't look pleased. Dio picked him up and hauled both of them out of the pit, as mud stuck to them both. Putting him down, Dio looked at Amster and was speaking. "You, Mud, where and drop my Poppy is over gap," he explained, and Dio nodded. He turned to Poppy, inflating like a balloon, and just floated over. "Nyah, balloon-style frog," she said, and she landed. Dio grinned. "Frogs are cool, which makes you cool," he said with a soft tone, and Poppy paused and then looked away as if embarrassed, which couldn't be, as the black mages were too cold and aloof to feel such things. Dio walked on and loved how the mud made his homemade armor look professional. He turned the corner and saw a huge room filled with mushrooms. This dungeon was so cool. These mushrooms grew in big, and Dio wondered if he could duel any of them. Amster managed to some kind of obscure cleric detect spell and touched a random mushroom, which in turn revealed to actually be a boar. The mushroom covered in the boar turned and began to chase Amster. "I help, do got this," the healer shouted with confidence, and his face half turned. Dio almost couldn't see what he was saying, but guessed Amster had the boar and handle with his great white magic. Poppy worked after him with her hood down low. Dio felt lost as he had nothing to do. Panicking, he turned and saw movement, a walking mushroom man. Dio danced on the spot and walked up to the jolly thing that was softly walking after Amster and the boar with interest. "Hello! I would like to duel you," Dio called out, and the mushroom man paused and then slowly looked at Dio. It waved and Dio waved back. It waved and Dio waved back. It waved and Dio waved back. The mushroom seemed to hear something in it, and it pulled its arm back. Not to the fullest extent that Dio noticed. It aimed a punch right at him. Dio almost squealed and dropped his sword, then hesitated. A fist fight. It wasn't heroic, and his skills were... Dio swallowed as he complained and ducked another punch. His foe demanded his best, and Dio, the mighty hero, would not back down. He shot forward and aimed a fist. Delta could only stare at the perfect hole through her mushroom grove, where a good chunk of her grove had been simply erased by the sound of the young man's attack. Delta was shocked. She gently directed Mr. Mushy to bow and sit down. Dio, the oh-my-god-he's-a-monster adventurer, bowed back and picked up his sword, which he swung with a novice effort. Even her goblins would swing their clubs better. Delta felt scared of these children, wondering what kind of village that they came from that they have that level of power. Her dungeon vibrated, and Delta could only watch as the 3 large spiders rushed in. "No! Run! These kids are the real monsters," Delta warned in vain. The spiders came, and Delta prayed for them. End of chapter. There is no epic loot here, only puns. Chapter 20, A Bory End. Delta watched as 3 more spiders rushed into the tunnel. They scrambled over each other as they burst into the web room. Since Dio and his friends hadn't left yet, her tripwire hadn't been able to reset, which was a shame because the speeds that the large spiders were going, it wouldn't take them long to reach the grove where the teens were milling around, as Amster managed to lose the ball in a sharp turn and refused to get off of the very tall mushroom that grew on the one side of the room. The ball prowled around the mushroom, snorting. Poppy pulled down her hood and Delta couldn't tell if she was laughing or just mumbling loudly. The girl didn't actually do anything to help Amster. And as long as there were people in her dungeon, Delta couldn't use her menus. While Dio had proven to be enthusiastic in his fighting, Delta had no idea if Poppy and Amster were powerful. The spiders crossed the mudroom, 2 of them hitting the mud hard and the final one hitting the right path. "Mr. Mushy Boar, guard the room," she called, and Delta watched as Mr. Mushy put Dio back down on the ground from where the Dio had been sitting on the large cap to watch Amster struggle to cheer him on. Dio had seemed to enjoy his peaceful her monster acted after their duel. Their boar snorted and ran off onto the thicket of the mushrooms, blending in. "Francois, get them out of there," Delta called as a magic goblin rushed down the hall. Delta had a feeling that they could handle themselves. It just didn't sit well with her stomach to let people who looked a lot younger than she felt comfortable with and face danger that she wouldn't be able to slow down or maybe even stop. They had come to adventure, not to deal with the consequences of Delta's harvesting missions. Dio might be able to kill them, Poppy and Amster too, but it didn't make it right. Delta would rather ask first than assume. If one of those spiders got lucky and bit, or something equally as bad, then Delta would have to see someone's child die. A young life snuffed out. Delta gripped her hands into fists as the spiders burst into the far end of the room, the large arachnids scattering as Misty Mushy swung his fists. "Mans, come!" Francois called to the room, and all 3 of the teens turned to the noise. "Poppy, it's a gob," Amster warned, and Dio rushed forward, hesitating as he stared intently at the large fang-filled mouth of Francois. "Hail, Poppy, what is it saying?" Dio shouted, and Poppy's hands were glowing softly. "Hands!" Master, Cole wants you to run. Come, Francois said in a huff, and he ran back down the tunnel. It wants us to follow. It said the dungeon said so. Poppy said with a sigh as the spider flew overhead and vanished into a patch of rutcot. Delta wondered if Dio had the trouble listening to things or he was just too excited to understand. It's a trap, Ammonster said in refusal, and Dio looked down the tunnel. Delta tried to shoo them mentally as her ball tried to tackle the two spiders ahead of them, and caught one in the side with its tusk. It turned, and Delta winced as it buried its fangs into the ball's face. Her ball squealed, and they both crashed into a mushroom. Yeah, those spiders are fighting the dungeon monsters. Something isn't right, Poppy said, and walked down the tunnel. We have to go this way, goblin or not. She shrugged and vanished. Dio pointed down the hall with his swords. Onwards to glory! He was cut off by a third spider that had been missing for the last few seconds burst out, fangs leaking a clear liquid at the exposed neck of Dio. Delta screamed, but the insect glowed with a dark purple color and dropped onto the ground as it twitched. The purple energy flowed to Ammonster's outstretched hand. I hate this place. Ammonster waved his hands and looked over the grove and, after hesitating for a moment, sent the purple energy at Delta's stumbling ball. The puncture wounds on its face healed over, and Delta watched with amazement as her ball looked a lot better. Nothing makes sense. Why are monsters killing monsters? And why is this place so weird? Where is Poppy? He demanded louder as Mr. Mushy calmly grabbed the spider, biting his face with one hand. He eyed it, and Delta waved her hands. Hug it, she yelled, and Mr. Mushy made a pleased noise and began to hug the spider, who flailed. Delta knew this would normally be an odd thing to request, but she had a feeling that Mr. Mushy didn't quite understand how to control his... The spider popped like a hairy balloon, and Delta covered her mouth in shock as Mr. Mushy looked confused at his now empty hands. Her ball was charging his spider again, and his face was covered in a web that made him stumble. He tripped over a rock, and the spider jumped onto the ball, biting hard. Dio looked ready to rush in and help, but Ammonster dragged him down the tunnel, ignoring the loud protests. Mr. Mushy, help him, Delta begged, and the spider took another bite before the ball stumbled into a standing position and then toppled back down as the poison in his system seemed to hurt him. Mr. Mushy swiped at the spider that Ammonster had attacked and stood up and rushed down the tunnel after yelling Dio. The second spider made a break for it, narrowly missing Mr. Mushy, grabbing at its legs. Go, please help the humans, Delta ordered, and her large monster lumbered off. Delta wanted to follow, but she sunk her knees next to the ball. It snorted weakly, and Delta tried to pet it, but she didn't feel its fur, nor did the ball react to her touch. Delta longed to feel the touch of another creature, especially now when her grove guardian wheezed as its body shuddered. Delta whispered softly to it, You were amazing. You were so cool, she said, and she couldn't stop her eyes from becoming hot and blurry as the tears formed. You couldn't even have a name, and I didn't spend that much time with you. And I asked you to fight me, and you did. Thank you. Delta choked out, and the boar snorted weakly as its tail whipped once. Delta lay next to it, her mind screaming that she didn't have time for this, but it hurt to even think of leaving it alone in its final moments. That was it. That was what it was like to be a dungeon, to watch those that she talked to, saw, felt happy, and to have around die so this game could be enjoyed. Delta didn't like it. She didn't like it at all. She didn't check to see if the ball was able to be respawned, or if she had purchased such a thing. Now it was too late, and Delta felt a horrible person for not even checking. Not even able to do so now due to her guests. The ball closed its eyes, and then before Delta's own eyes, melted into a white mist and vanished, leaving behind a large wooden shield with a ball motif in front of it. The slightly jutting out tusk made it look dangerous to hit someone with it. Ball, you dropped loot. You were even cooler than I thought, Delta whispered, cheeks blotchy as she stood, turning in a hurry to catch up with the fleeing adventurers. A menu appeared as she left the room, and Delta tripped and crashed into the ground as she read it. Ordinary ball will respawn in 1 hour once the dungeon is empty. Delta lay there for a moment and wondered why the menu waited until after she had her heart torn out before telling her this. Still, Delta prayed that she never had to do that again. She promised that she would check all the monsters for respawn options after this was all over. Even if she had to go to the second floor in 100 years, Delta would rather keep her friends and crave critters. Shiny upgrades and sprawling second floor just wasn't worth the pain that she'd feel losing her friends. She got up and zoomed down the tunnel. Francois II was not accustomed to many things that had happened in his short life. Being created, he had a rough idea of the things that he was supposed to do and the things that he was supposed to kill. When he became an apprentice goblin, that list evolved to things that he had to deal with. Things that he should choose to deal with, and things that the master forced him to deal with. This one was one of those things that his master made him deal with. "To the towers! Spiders coming!" Francois yelled as Billy, the goblin archer, hesitated at the sight of humans but shot down the tunnel at the approaching spiders. He turned and pointed at the two spots. "Sticky trap, follow me," he ordered, and began to weave between the traps and up the hill. "Nya, this is a goblin mage. Do goblins speak to people?" the girl in the large hood asked as she shuffled up the hill, as if the goblin-eating spiders weren't just about to enter the room. The fire-headed child rushed up and cheered. His voice made Francois's ears bleed. The last one, the dark-haired man with glasses and a scowl to match the quist man that stalked up the hill. His aura was dark and foreboding. It also smelled like strawberries. It was an odd combination, and Francois turned and aimed his staff down the hill at the first sight of the hairy leg appeared. "Burn!" he cackled, and a fire erupted from his staff, making one of the beasts scream. Fire was wonderful. Fire was powerful, and he'd rather burn things than be forced to talk to them. But his master wished him to be nice and polite. A box appeared with the upteenth time since he evolved, and he growled. "Would you like to evolve?" Francois waved it away. Billy fired another arrow into the spider that rushed up the hill, sliding as its legs hit the first trap, and its body was sent off balance by the legs suddenly not moving. Hob and Gob threw rocks, and they squished into the spider's body. The second one used the first spider to jump and reach the tower with an agility only a truly desperate creature could manage. It got one leg up, and numb with the thug slammed down with its toothy club. The spider slid down and crashed into the first one. Yeah, salamander style, fire acid. The girl said, and the energy level of the various mushrooms that spouted around the dungeon, which was to say, not very much. The result was interesting, and Francois enjoyed seeing the bubbling red liquid splash down over the tower like a stream of boiling oil. "Poppy, that was amazing, right? Ammonster, we're working with goblins." Firehead pointed out, and the dark child who just gave him a look that Francois could respect. A loathing, annoyed, offended, and a pinch of done. Francois could really respect such a look. He readied another fireball as his master's voice came to him. "Ucking dramatic menus. My cheeks feel puffy." She sniffed, and Francois stood straighter, trying to show how powerful he was to his master. One of the spiders, missing a leg and looking to form around the eyes due to the fire vomit, jumped up again, and Francois engulfed a firing explosion midair. "Okay, that was cool." Master Data complimented, and Francois looked smugly at the other goblins, but then Billy shot an arrow through one of the eyes of the final spider. How he did such a thing with those wonky arrows was beyond Francois. "Poppy, didn't they say that the dungeon wanted us safe, or out of the way? What do you think that means?" The child screamed, and Francois pleaded with his master to go mad and command him to end the child's noise one way or another. It never came, and the hooded girl just looked at me thinking, "Obviously, you idiot, the dungeon was only playing and might have to deal with the elders of the town. We could be in a massive trouble since it has to waste resources to guard us or to put up with our antics. If they find out, then—" The dark child trailed off. "The dungeon doesn't want us dead. Yeah, sounds like we caused it hassle." She agreed, and the child with the death wish spoke again. "Ah, we owe the dungeon a lot. I have 6 coppers in my pocket and a ham sandwich in case of a heroic break time," he offered, and Francois knew that it was the best tribute that they had got yet. That fact was both sad and annoying. Send hoped to finish the spider off with Numb. Oh, and send Gob back to the grove for the shield. Please, don't know the Bori can respawn in that room that he dropped loot. Did you? Master asked, and Francois rolled a few answers around before picking a nice neutral evasion. "It sounds like a nice surprise, Master." He bowed his head, and Delta sounded pleased. Sorry for making you do all this work, but I really wanted to make this place a kind of place where people can learn and grow and not die because they were used as meat shields. She explained, and Francois watched as Num and the sound-breaking child shook hands and seemed eager to outshout each other. He felt his eye twitch. I mean, it caused Bori some trouble as well, since I should be preparing better, and I guess that was just me being pig-headed. Master snorted, and Francois felt that he should burn this world. Just one little spark in the right place. But no, he needed to be nice, and he needed to be diplomatic. Would you like to, Evo? Francois bit down on a scream. I see. Have you looked everywhere? Quiz asked, and he rubbed his sleep from his eyes. The woman in the blue dress and white petticoat just nodded. Everywhere, she answered, a voice so soft and tender that it was like the wind sprite dancing past his ears. Next to her was a man who just looked concerned. Mr. and Mrs. Braundo, parents of one Dio Braundo, looked worried, but they voiced their concern in the most silent of manners. Quiz just handed them a piece of paper and a pen. Write things down, it'll go quicker. Quiz tried to aim the polite, but ended up sounding deeply deprived of cranky. The next couple actually spoke, and each word was like the nails of the back of Quiz's eyeballs. Well, I got up for my energetic 4 a.m. jog around the village when I saw Ammonster's room lacked the usual gloom about it. So being the number 1 dad, I knocked and waited exactly 12 seconds. Kids need their space after all. And I opened it to find that he was gone. It was odd, because the sun would be out soon, and Amster had declared that he's eternal foe, but I think that it just stays up all night, summoning cantrip-level demons. The man beamed, and Quiz felt the urge to go back to bed and rise up. Father Wallum, number 1 head priest of the town, was amongst many other things, was the father of Amster Wallum. Quiz just smiled, lips cracking at the effort. The man was also a saint-level cleric, and who could smile him off for this very spot that he stood and should feel so inclined. He handed him a piece of paper and went to the last 2 people. All right, Quiz, you look like crap. The gruff man nodded, and Quiz felt some faith in humanity returned at the speaking to someone normal. Gone. You look like something a bear spat out. Quiz grunted, and his wife nodded at him. Peacekeeper Fire Smasher, I hope this day finds you, dull, she said curtly, and Quiz gave her a long look. Madam Roth, I hope you stub your toe. Quiz responded with an equal politeness. Garn and Sally Roth were parents of one Poppy Roth. The girl wore a hood so big, Quiz was expecting her to start chanting and hitting herself with a plank of wood any day now. Poppy was also a rare blue mage, not a skill that you could learn, only be born with. Well, besides the mutated one-offs that sometimes happened when people cosplayed as a monster for too long. Or of the few body modification doctors in some cities, but they were more often used to rid oneself of a bothersome birth trait or ability or an embarrassing growth. Not everyone liked to turn into a dragon, not everyone liked to attract animals when they sang in the shower, and everyone, bar hardcore witches, hated warts, of course. 3 kids. Where could they possibly be the day after Quiz announced the new dungeon, just outside of town? It was a puzzle, and one Quiz would normally allow for people to figure out themselves. But with Delta involved, things could get really weird. Well, the dungeon sounded like she was on top of things. Quiz could only hope that she could control the 3 teens long enough for Quiz to get there. I, Dio, challenge you, Sir Pig Knight, the boy screamed, and Delta went to a happy place. It was filled with people that didn't rush off and didn't challenge her battle-lasting boss. Fair intruder, I accept. Now we must set the rules, due to my master's screaming. Ran coughed, and Dio looked puzzled. Rules? Did you say rules? Ammonster said as he crawled under the flailing Great Mushy. Delta had forgotten that Mr. Mushy had never met his cousin. In fact, Mr. Mushy was so happy to meet his evil, demented family member that he was hugging it with the cheerful noises as the Great Mushy hissed in fury. Yeah, this dungeon is weird, but it's nice, she yawned. Ran pointed his spear at Dio, who held the new shield that had dropped from the Bori. Now, my master says that you can start at any time, and you may forfeit. It was all the Fran got out before Dio charged. For glory, he yelled. Delta looked at the absolute chaos happening around her. 3 teens fighting her boss on one side, a screaming cheerful mushroom on the other side, and Francois with the screaming at the thin air over by the door leading to her core, whilst the rest of the goblins were sitting on the stands cheering for Sir Franon. No, no, no! The goblin mage yelled at the air as if trying to make something go away. The act looked familiar. But no one was dying. Bran took careful swipes and made Bacon do rather obvious charges towards Poppy. Dio landed on the pig's butt after a few flying leaps and tried to grab Sir Fran. Bacon then showed that what happened when a pig devoured too many gut-rot mushrooms in a short period of time. Quiz stormed into the dungeon with the mood grew darker. He came up short as 3 goblins, of various size and class, carried the 3 moaning teens out of the dungeon entrance hall. "Darkness take me," Poppy whispered and Dio groaned quietly. Amster didn't move. "Master said they do well," the gob with the little green hat had bow said. Quiz watched as he had 3 teens on the ground and only 2 hands. "What happened?" he asked, reaching down and doing his quick check of their vitals. "Bacon did a gut rot," the fur-covered gob muttered. Quiz didn't know what exactly meant, nor did he have any inclination to find out. The smell wafting off the teens gave him an idea, sadly. "Is Delta around?" he requested, not wanting to even think about the damage that these kids might have done in a single night. All the goblins looked up at the same time. "Master apologizes and says she did her best at watching them." The arrow gob shrugged. The usual mouthpiece Francois didn't speak. He appeared to be sulking and glaring at something. "That shield?" Quiz nodded at the wooden shield Dio refused to let go of and drifted in and out of awareness. "Screaming man earned loot, and Master congrats him." Francois grumbled and turned to walk away. "Hey, do you have any cons or something? I can't carry these 3 teens on my own." Quiz lied, and Francois' ears twitched. "Master of a hobgoblin. They leave dungeon, if promised to keep him safe." The goblin added slyly, and Quiz raised one eyebrow sharply. "Delta has contracted monsters?" he questioned, impressed, and Francois just grinned and walked away. "Master has 3, thanks to you," was the last thing Quiz heard before the goblin turned the corner. Well, if he hadn't had 3 teens to look after and a deep desire for his bed, Quiz would go after the smug goblin and shake it a few times to find out what the hell the bugger meant by that. "Sure, I'll keep your gobs from trouble the best of my ability, as a peacekeeper." Quiz promised he wasn't very good at being a peacekeeper, but he prided himself on doing well in the glare of intimidation department at least. 2 goblins ran out and looked at him. "You are," Quiz began, and the goblins nodded. "Hob-gob," they said, and Quiz liked their quick-to-the-point attitude. Gob grabbed the dark one and the beginning to twitch. Hob grabbed the one who's still talking in his sleep, and he ordered and he picked up Poppy. Just bringing 2 contracted goblins back to the town that had at least 3 retired goblin slayers seemed safe enough. Quiz guessed that it couldn't hurt. Who knows, maybe he could get the little green guys to do some of his work for him before they had to return to the dungeon. Contracted monsters changed everything. It explained how Delta was forming so fast. Still, the gobs were most likely unaware that they had never breed or even noticed how no longer had to eat. He definitely bet that they hadn't noticed how much they felt the need to protect Delta when the dungeon had people in it. And most of all, Quiz bet that the goblins were not aware of how many monsters, crazy people, animals, demi-beings, lost golems, and depraved lonely men would kill to take their place. Being a slave to a dungeon held a certain appeal to a lot of weirdos. He just needed to talk to Delta before any humans offered themselves to her contracts, and he had to make sure that she was aware of the danger. How much the Delta could influence them, and how much they could change her in turn. End of chapter. There is no epic lucha, only puns. Chapter 21. Flaws and Thorns. Perhaps it was the silence, perhaps it was the after effect of Dio. Delta couldn't say, but the dungeon felt more empty after everyone had left. Hob and Gob had gone to help Quiz carry the teens back home to the nearby town. As soon as they had gone, various things began to be absorbed. Broken metal sword tip absorbed. 3 times black forest spider absorbed. Ham sandwich absorbed. 6 copper coins absorbed. Delta felt a little spoiled, but she was just happy that none of this came at the price of one of the teens' lives. It took her a moment for her menu to form up the results of her gains. Low-grade steel equipment has been added to the research menu, 18 DP. Ham sandwich has been added to items, 4 mana. Copper enhancements have been added to the research menu, 13 DP. The following upgrades have been unlocked by the common silver spinner spiders. Leap, give the ability for your spiders to leap small distances, 3 DP. Devour, able to make webs much faster after eating, 8 DP. Cannot be food made from the dungeon. Delta felt bloated as her mana soared from 54 to 79. Now normally she would be panicking, running around like a chicken who has had the fire and maybe about to also explode. But not today. Delta knew exactly what she was doing and going to spend her mana on. It was a clear weakness in her dungeon, something the spiders had used to their advantage, and something that Delta just plain wanted. Frigging doors! Delta stared at the entrance chamber, the place the door just a little in front of them formed, like a stand from the ground up, until she had a door that looked like 5 uneven pieces of wood, planks nailed together, and a single wooden beam across the top and bottom. The hinges looked like a stone. All in all, it was a crappy door that Delta could imagine Dio pulling off its hinges like some comedy skit as he got too excited. But Delta was pleased and tried to remain positive. It wasn't just one door she was going to be adding, but 10. Delta rushed around placing doors at the entrance and exit of every room. Excessive? Delta didn't really care if it meant future spider attacks were slowed since they lacked thumbs. Or would some monster spiders have thumbs? Would Delta be assaulted by Spider-Man? She hoped not. Her pun game might not be up for the challenge. Delta placed her final door after the goblin camp and stretched with relief. Sure, she had down 40 mana, but her dungeon now had the first set of barriers. Curious, she held a finger over the door. Simple wooden door. Upgrade wood to be more solid, 4 DP. Upgrade door to be armed with a low-grade trap if opened. Pitfall. No other trap usable for harmful results. May still be specific other traps. 8 DP. This upgrades affects the doors only. Make slightly decorated door requires copper research. Upgrade doors to be reinforced with metal bands requires low-grade steel research. Upgrade door to have a lock. Locked until key item is found or made. The menu apologizes for the bad wordplay and can only blame the dungeon. Come on, I'm hilarious, Delta argued, but couldn't help but enjoy the little comments being added to her lists. She paused to think on that. Menu, what are you? She asked aloud and the window appeared. I am a mana-enhanced notification utility. Oh, well that explains nothing. Delta flicked her menus as she hummed. But why are you helping me? She asked a moment later. The menu paused for a few seconds before answering. This dungeon is rather stunted. It lacks common knowledge and the ability to operate the most basic of mana procedures. If the dungeon were a living being, it would not know how to breathe. I'm here to help you. Thanks. I'm glad you're here. Do all dungeons get a menu? She asked brightly as she eyed the research list. Locked doors sounded useful for later. I do not know. If we meet another dungeon, I'll inquire for you. Now please purchase something. Your dungeon points. Delta points. Delta grinned as she argued. It just felt nice to speak to someone without a mouthpiece. Dungeon points is the correct term. Delta points are better, plus I am Delta, not the dungeon. Delta remained and the menu flickered. Remaining Delta. You have 82 DP. It is advised that you spend them in preparation for the next attack. Visit? Delta wasn't sure the menu knew how to deal with her chosen method of human interaction, so she purchased both the copper and low-grade steel researches. That opened up a lot of things. Copper decorations are now able to be formed instead of wood or stone. Copper locks and keys are now be able to form. Copper coins may be created. Copper tools may be created. Copper. This menu will sum up all of the done. Delta may do a lot with copper. Low-grade steel researched. There's a lot of upgrades here. This menu will store them appropriately into the proper menus for you. I will list the important features. LGS weapons and armor can now be formed. LGS items decorations can be formed. Steel spikes added to the trap menu and may be added to future traps and more upgraded traps. Delta smiled at the menu's added comments. It was odd to see the text gain some semblance of personality, but Delta just took it as a sign of how little she really knew of this world. Looking down at the list again, she would be hard-pressed to see where she could use spikes. Outside of normal usage, Delta couldn't find any. maybe as a deterrent in the front of the core room. It had to have a floor if no adventure could really pass it. She put her nosy finger to it. Steel spikes added this trap to a wall or a floor will cause the foot-long spike to shoot out and pierce the clumsy or slow. Dan manner. Delta made a face, but hesitating, she spoke aloud. Menu, can we use the trigger for a trap? She asked and a window appeared. Pressure plates, tripwires, time running out, lack of key item, sensors, destruction of an object, number of people, breaking a rule. There may be more, but this menu lacks more information. Delta was impressed by the sheer ways one could trigger a death trap, but thinking back on her gaming days, she could remember all of these happening in one game or another. There was one that stuck out. What's the rule? She pointed out in the unsure voice. A rule is a special enchantment that may be placed on a room. The people who enter are told the rule and must obey or suffer the consequences. A rule cost at the very minimal will into the hundreds of mana to sustain and hold. They can be abused or have loopholes, as no one rule can be perfect. So, if I made a rule that all the people who had to enter had to quack like waddles until they left, that would be... She trailed off and the menu chimed in. Rules that affect people cost far more. They are the epitome of the ability. It is easier placed to rules on objects or tasks. Ah, that makes sense. So solve this riddle or say the right word, and the door opens. A puzzle room that doesn't require setting up a pressure plate. Delta paced as Francois entered the core room. Master, the dungeon been invaded by mimics. Doors have been appeared everywhere. He warned and Delta blinked at him. Francois, I put the doors there, she said calmly, and the goblin looked at the orange orb. But they do look bad. I thought that they were bad mimics, so I hit one, and it just fell apart. I set it on fire. He shuffled backwards as Delta's mind went blanked. You burned my new door, she repeated slowly. The menu had a side shifted. Goblin apprentices tend to set things on fire. Oh yeah, I did say that before. Delta just inhaled and went to replace the door near the pond. They weren't crappy, just rough. Delta grumbled, and she respawned the door with a huff and upgraded the doors with a solid wood upgrade, dropping her DP back to 47. The door in front of her was near the spider room, glowed as the shoddy wood creaked and became much tighter, packed together. The actual wood itself became sturdy, and Delta guessed that it would even take some serious blows if they could be properly closed. Delta put her hands on her hips and smiled, pleased by the result. There, now Francois could stop. Master, door changed shape, I protect you. Francois screamed, and the smell of burnt wood filling the dungeon once more. Delta turned and stomped down the hall. Menu, how do I strangle a monster? She demanded. Delta needs an avatar of sorts. A basic projection would not suffice to interact with the world, but it would allow them to see you. Her anger melted away with a sudden blankness, her emotions hidden behind a veil of cotton, unsure of what she just heard. Avatar, she just repeated. An avatar, the ability to project yourself into a physical shell that interacts with the dungeon. The most basic will give you a floating ball of orange light to match your core. Only monsters will be able to see you. How much? Delta demanded, and the menu was quiet for a moment. It is not a matter of cost, but requirements. To develop such an ability needs the dungeon core to grow. The core grows when new levels become created. If your desire is to use a body to talk with, the guests, then I advise you to seek more levels. Delta stood there for a moment. To talk, to greet, to smile, to ask people not to attack. It had only been 3 days and Delta was going mad. With no sleep, she was constantly aware of what she couldn't do. To think that she'd just got a few new floors that she could speak to Dio, laugh with Rudy, and throw puns at Quiz. It was a temptation that she couldn't resist. But she needed at least 200 DP for the next level. That was more than she had at any one time. Delta wasn't worried, however. She clenched her hands into fists and marched forwards. Delta was going to be the best damn dungeon in this world. The best, safest, friendliest dungeon in the world. The first, she needed to stop Francois from burning down her dungeon. Second, she needed someone, anyone, to stop by and help her out. At this point, Delta hoped it was anyone. Holy Doublegast was not one of the wasting perfectly good sunlight. She smiled at Von the Manker as he fled from the first rays of sun. Ah, such a lovely man. Like Lorna Tear, the man bloomed best under the moon's touch. Holly hummed as she walked through the town. Basket on one hand, she nodded to the people as she passed, knowing her cheeks were the usual rosy red. Holly couldn't help her naturally cheery complexion. Holly hummed as she stopped to pick up Puppy Pop, a common daisy offshoot with a rather bitter smell. Holly put it into a basket and kept walking. People would call the plant a weed, but Holly knew if it was cooked at a low temperature with some golden spit, it made for a lovely poison. Not that Holly had much use for poisons, beside the odd insect poaching. Still, it was relaxing to brew these days. She smiled as Holly appeared in the shadows and quickly entered his shop, something wriggling in his hands. That reminded Holly that she needed some cheese for tomorrow's dinner. Her dairy cups blossoms were done for the season, and Holly couldn't count on them for any fresh cheese. Quiz walked past, arguing with two little goblins. Holly watched as one drooled, and Holly patted her pockets, but sighed as she had left her collecting tubes at home. Ah well, next time. Quiz was making friends, even if they were a bit odd. Holly went past the baker and stopped for a sample of today's selection. Valky, the woman behind the counter, stood to attention. "Early as usual, Mrs. Dabergast. The sun's only just come up," Valky said politely, and Holly knew that this woman was one of the more recent arrivals in the town. Holly liked her. The poor dear was clearly nervous about being in durance, and it showed in the way Valky didn't meet anyone's eyes. Yes, well, this town did have that reputation. Holly beamed, hoping to show Valky a proper neighborhood welcome. First, she fell down with her magic and strangled the growing bricker-brambles, what had begun to dig into the woman's shop and do untold amounts of damage. Holly loved her plants, fungi, roots, thorns, mutated tomatoes, and the occasional dryad party, and even the odd tree boss, but she wasn't going to ignore how much some people just weren't equipped to deal with them. "Valky, your shop smells amazing. You must rise even earlier than me to have all of this done. Are you, by any chance, a secret baker of the Tau Mountains?" Holly teased, and the girl blushed with a pleased expression. Holly eyed the dessert, and that looked like the jam spread over a strawberry. It looked good. "No, Mrs. Dabergast. I just learned it from the capital. It got expensive, so I moved here. I think my teacher's teacher once served a hero back in the day, but that's about the extent of my history. I didn't expect this town to be so, Valky suddenly blushed, and Holly smiled. The deer was a blushing bride bloom in human form. "So, like the rumors, don't worry. Just be yourself and you'll find a place in this town of your own. I'll scrounge up some of the old recipes from the people, and I'll see if I can take advantage of the more unusual markets around here," Holly promised, her curly black hair falling into her eyes before Holly brushed it back. Valky looked deeply pleased and handed Holly a dessert that she was eyeing. "Then I insist that you take this for your troubles," the girl said, looking away, and Holly accepted the gift. It was like the good old days. Help those in need get the treats. Holly would have to make sure Valky became active in solving her own problems where she could. It wouldn't do if she started making requests to the wrong people. Holly encouraged the sweet suckles on the roof to grow faster. It would cheer the girl up a tad. Saying their farewells, Holly continued down the road to the outside of the town. She picked several more plants as she spotted them and headed down the town towards the forest. Quiz's announcement was certainly a good one. At first, a dungeon did seem highly bothersome until Quiz told him about the good nature. Holly hummed loudly, several bushes and trees around her swinging to her tune. Dungeons did contain the best plants, and while Holly didn't expect too much from the new deer, any hints of a good growth would make Holly's life interesting. What if she grew divine saint beans, queen jewels? Oh, it could even maybe grow the legendary but unwanted death blossoms. They were a bit gothic and had a habit of spinning their flowers around, firing seeds at people in a perfect circle as it hissed. In return, one could escape death in some fashion for a period of time. Holy Dabergast only knew that the lacking options. One could influence how a new dungeon grew by giving it a particular set of tributes. It was highly frowned upon, as it could rob equal opportunity from other adventurers and job classes, but Holly didn't see any harm in allowing a dungeon the option. Webs, mushrooms, goblins, and mud. This was the nature-aligned dungeon for now, and Holly was all too happy to keep it that way. Well, the first floor anyway. The deer could have fun doing what she willed with the others. Holly had put up scrambling down the 70-floor dungeons on the shelf as soon as she had her first child. It was one of Holly's best memories when her water broke in the dungeon during the final boss. The dungeon had been so freaked out that it had been boss murder itself so that Holly could leave faster. She should send a letter to it, had it been some years. If Holly remembered right, the Fairplay Company had set up a shop in the dungeon, wasn't able to grow past its current floor, due to the company preventing it from doing so with the meddling. Holly let a frown appear and the nature went quiet around her. If one man never left the dungeon or took shifts, then the dungeon could never improve itself. The bosses respawned regardless of people being there or not. The company took advantage of that. Holly had remembered seeing the complete map, trapped treasure, secret tunnels, and all sorts of unsavory things available for people to buy. People flocked to the building like flesh flies to dung. Holly sniffed once and then tried to let it go. The dungeon was still there. It hadn't broken itself in frustration. Holly could only hope something happened and the dungeon kept people out for a long time. The sheer mana pains and the poor thing must be in. All that mana and no place to use it. It would be hell. Holly paused and she looked around to see that she had been surrounded while she was deep in thought. 10 or so black dire wolves. Holly looked over her shoulder and saw another 3. My dears, now is not really the time, she said disapprovingly, and the lead wolf snarled as he met her eyes. The rest growled, and Holly saw they still had blood in their muzzles. Holly wondered if that was really how her day would start. But she looked down and saw that a rare fetid bud. Well, this is just perfect, Holly smiled, and the one wolf barked and snarled, sending drool dripping down the one side of its face. You see, this little beauty can live off water, sugar water, some ales, some wines, and blood. So, let me tell you cute little thing something. Holly put her hand on her mouth to hide a smile. You think yourselves the crows who have found a wriggling worm just so juicy. But you see, I'm no lovely worm. I'm a root that you're nibbling at. You see, where you annoy the root, the tree gets angry. Holly warned and the wolves all began to circle her. And you wouldn't like my tree angry, she said, voice sugar and poison. The wolf lunged and a solid wood spear pierced up through the ground and out of the other end of the wolf. The ground rumbled as Holly's garden, ever flowing and ever silent, broke free of the soil. Holly bent down to stroke the rare plant as it became very well watered. After a moment, she hummed and walked off to the dungeon entrance. End of chapter. That, my friends, concludes this episode. I hope that you enjoyed. If you wish to support the author of the story, there will be a link below. If you wish to support this channel, there are multiple ways to do so, which will all also be linked below. But the easiest way would be to subscribe and share my videos as much as possible. And until next time, I hope you all have a good one. And I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.